Hello, so I'm Andrew Truby. I'm an executive head teacher in Sheffield and also work with Learning Unlimited Teaching School Alliance and St Wilfrid's English Hub. And today I'm going to talk about Mastery English, which is a project that we have been involved with for a number of years now. So to begin with, why did we create Mastery English? Initially, writing had been a real issue for our schools, and it seemed to be on our school improvement plan every single year from when I was head teacher at St Thomas of Canterbury, and we'd have reasonable results in good results in maths and in reading, and we'd always have some kind of problem with writing. So every year, whether it was boys writing or writing for everybody or writing for the more able, writing would have been our key priority. In 2014-15, we'd had a pretty good program in place. We were introducing a mastery program in mathematics, and we had a lot of success with Read Write Inc in terms of early reading and phonics. We weren't really convinced by some of the other products on the market, but we were looking for something for English that would follow on from the Read Write Inc program. So once the children had graduated from that, when they go into year 2 and beyond, we wanted to have something there that would build on that. And although we thought we had a writing issue, actually we later realized that we had a reading issue. So when we started to look at English, we had this mantra, well, if you can write to read and read to write. And actually once we had that penny dropping moment, things became much clearer for us. And of course, being a frequent reader is much more of an advantage than coming from a well-off background. So actually making the reading a key part of our English was really important to us. So this was the vision for Mastery English. Just give you a moment to read that. And so the key here was bringing together that whole English curriculum at primary from year 2 to year 6 and bringing it together in a really coherent way in the context of the whole class high quality texts. And so again, really important in terms of choosing great books, because we know from research that too many children still don't have copies of their own books. And actually, if they do, they're much more likely to achieve better. And so it's not just about teaching children to read. Our job is also to create the right conditions so that children want to read, so that they become frequent readers. So within the Mastery English program, we decided to have 3 high quality texts for each year group. And actually, we've ended up with more in year 2. But from year 3 to 6, we do have 3 really carefully selected high quality texts, which the children have copies of. And it's really important in terms of that developing a love of reading. The children had been previously used to looking at a lot of extracts on screens and that sort of thing, or photocopied pages of books. Actually having their own copy of a whole book to have and to hold was a really important element of this program. And alongside that, there are other extracts around high quality text. So they're not limited to these books. With the new Ofsted framework, the Education Inspection Framework, we knew that there was much more of a focus on subjects as their own disciplines. So we really thought about English in this sense. And we were tempted at times to make the English curriculum kind of more cross-curricular, but actually we stayed true to keeping English as its own subject and thinking carefully about the knowledge within that and how that builds and how that's designed, and vocabulary, which I'll come on to shortly. So within the whole class texts, again, the curriculum is very, very carefully mapped against those assessment frameworks and the national curriculum, but also brings in that kind of teacher expertise around what is important for children to learn and when. And we'll look at the structure a little bit further on. Very interesting in terms of children's knowledge and also teacher knowledge essentially around children's literature. But what came out of this, I suppose, an unintended consequence really of when we designed this curriculum, we'd actually designed it kind of mainly from the teacher's expertise and then sort of retrospectively looked at the structure and improved and refined that structure. But one of the things that really struck us when we started to map the knowledge, we found that there was some text-specific knowledge, some kind of disciplinary knowledge within there, and the disciplinary knowledge around the kind of English, around the reading, the writing, grammar, sentence level, that was very, very progressive and so on. But actually there was a whole wealth of text-specific knowledge linked to the themes that these great books were exploring, and also the vocabulary within that. And so we started to ask ourselves lots of questions around what's important to teach and what's important, what can just be kind of explored in the context of these wonderful books. One of the things that, one of our aims was to bring about that real love of reading. And we know from some of Professor Teresa Kremin's work that teacher knowledge, teacher subject knowledge in relation to children's literature is an area for development, especially in primary English. Teachers' knowledge of the books and of the authors and so on. So actually through the Mastery English programme, we really wanted to make sure that every time the teachers are sharing these books and presenting these books, that they're really passionate about it. And in our training with the teachers, even if we think, we say to teach, this might not actually be the kind of book that you would personally want to read, but you need to show that passion throughout. And Alex Quigley talks about this in his recent book around closing the reading gap. And again, this is something we really tried to bring into the Mastery English programme and help teachers to understand the importance of that. Looking at the structure of the programme, you can see here, just moving my face out of the way. Looking at the structure there, you can see sort of two things here, that kind of higher level overview behind. And just before I go on to that, it's important to emphasize that we're making an assumption that the children have been successful in the phonics program, and in our particular schools we use the Read Write Inc program. So when the children have reached an appropriate level of fluency, ideally by the end of year 1, start of year 2, they would then be able to access and move on to the Mastery English program. If there are children without an appropriate level of reading, then we'd either be doing, they'd either still be doing the phonics program, or at certain points they might be having adapted texts and so on. But this will give you an idea of the overview. So within the national curriculum areas, we have them across here. We then mapped the program against this and made some really careful decisions around when we would teach certain concepts, when we'd bring in particular knowledge and why, and how that would work kind of progressively. So the texts, they do 3 whole class texts per year, and they do explore certain themes. They also incorporate the national curriculum knowledge and skills, and they also have that text-specific knowledge and vocabulary, which I was just describing. And within each one, it's broken down into smaller units where there are writing opportunities. And so all of this is the children are immersed into the high quality text that we've carefully chosen for the quality of the text, and then the writing opportunities are built in within that. So in terms of the curriculum structure, we had experience of the mathematics curriculum design, which was clearly more hierarchical, and it was really important that certain concepts were taught at certain times and then built on, and actually essential to have explored and covered before introducing other concepts or taking them further or deeper. With the English, it was far more of a spiral curriculum design, and what this meant really was that themes, topics, specific knowledge and disciplinary knowledge was introduced at certain points, but then actually the children would revisit that at different points and taking it deeper. And that also happened within the context of other texts, within and across different year groups. And each time they were bringing a slightly different perspective to an aspect of their schema when they'd encounter that concept again. And here you can see a little bit more around that spiral approach. And so the topics are revisited, and each time it does relate to the previous learning, but the students, the children's competence increases each time. And I've mentioned this already. You can just see it in a slightly different format here. And so it might be that some core learning is introduced in year 2, going a little bit deeper in the spring term and then in the summer term. It could be revisited and revised in year 3. That particular core learning, we don't just leave there. It could be revised. We could kind of re-emphasize it in year 4, in year 5, and year 6. And this could also be linked to, particular skills as well. So it might be that just because we've learned about a full stop or a comma quite early on, it doesn't mean that we just stop and ignore that. There might be little reminders around things like that as we go through, because we want to build and not forget. And again, that's with the spiral approach. Each time we encounter something, we just add that slightly different perspective. So within our particular approach, the key learning is taught within the context of that whole class text, that really high quality book. And then it's revisited again within the context of another text, taking it to a deeper level. So as I've said, that means it's not hierarchical, although we could be going deeper, because one particular component is not fundamentally required before another can be taught. This is particularly relevant when we might get pupils who join the school a little bit later on, move schools. So we're not saying that you need to have done, that every child has to have done the BFG here before they go on to do the Queen's Nose. And in fact, schools who have adopted this programme, they would sometimes have children who, they maybe start the programme in several year groups at once, so they don't necessarily have to have done all of the year 3 content before they start to launch the year 4 content. However, they do need to pay particular attention to children's reading fluency, because what we don't want to do is put texts which children cannot independently decode in front of them without appropriate support or scaffolding. So in terms of the structure, so at that kind of higher level, we've got from year 2 to year 6, we've got the whole programme, and that learning sequence has been carefully designed so that all pupils, including the lowest 20% and those who are disadvantaged, can be really successful. Then breaking that down year by year, so we've got the 3 terms and the 3 texts, and then at a more micro level we've got 2-week units. So we've broken it down into those much more kind of smaller steps, and across the 2-week unit, or 10 lessons if you like, the pupils work towards a piece of extended writing at the end of that. During that time in the classroom, they have an annotated text, which is an example of this piece of writing, and they may annotate that over the 2 weeks as a class and refer back to it, but they can see what a good piece of writing of this type actually looks like. They also write in every single lesson. That's really important to us. So that builds up stamina. So they write a little bit each day. So we know that talk and language development is really, really important, and doing a lot of that orally. But we also think that it's important that they actually practice the skill of writing and even handwriting every single day. And they develop the skills for that extended piece. So we start with that extended piece in mind, and we work back and we create a learning journey which will take the children there, looking at all of the different smaller skills that they're going to need to put into practice in that extended piece. And by writing extended piece every 2 weeks, every 10 days approximately in school, they really build that stamina needed to become a writer, and that builds up their independent writing skills. The reading comprehension, grammar, sentence level work and punctuation, again, is all taught through the context of that high quality texts, and also we bring in relevant extracts there. Previously, as I said, we used to use a lot of extracts, and not really the value of, we didn't really see the value of the whole class text. The great thing about the children actually starting and finishing and reading a book cover to cover is that they see what reading is. We realised that previously we had been limiting their experience by them thinking that reading was something you did with a few pages, rather than seeing a whole book from start to finish. The questions that are dropped in there, and they're all dropped in on the slides, the flip charts and the slides that we have, they're all in the format of the end of key stage tests, because we know that that's how the children are going to be assessed, and familiarity is really, really important when you are accessing an external test. At the individual lesson level, we have a 6-part lesson. So it starts by engaging the children. Then we introduce something which could be the new learning, some direct teaching. We might include some misconceptions there. And then we've got a consider and practice phase where they might work in pairs or groups, and they practice the skills that they've been taught. That may be recorded formally or maybe informally, depending on the lesson. Then they take it a little bit deeper, so they extend that new learning and show some kind of depth of understanding within there. And then there's an independent task, and that's that there would be support and scaffolding to make sure that every child can be successful in that, as well as some opportunities to take the learning deeper for those who are ready for that. And then there'd be some reflection, and we've built some structured reflection based on the work around metacognition and self-regulation. We've built some structured reflection again into the lesson at that point. And to keep the kind of flow of the lesson and to keep the pace of the lesson, and also to bring in kind of best practice in terms of formative assessment, we have checkpoints which are built in between each stage, and those checkpoints could be a very quick thing just to make sure that to check the children's understanding at that point. It could be, it does keep that kind of pace and keeps that engagement as well. And they're often things like small grammar questions or true or false, lots of things that kind of promote thinking and so on. And building on that recall and retrieval. Within the texts as well, as I said, there is text-specific knowledge as well as that disciplinary knowledge. So, for example, here we've got Holes, which would look at Black history, crime and punishment, brings in some American geography and what it was like in 19th century America. That's not to say that we are doing a history unit at the same time. The teachers might be in some of the schools, but actually the text explores those themes, and we thought it was very useful for that to be mapped so that we can see the kind of diet and experience that the children are getting. And in War Horse as well, we've got the First World War kind of links there. And looking at things like propaganda. So it's really interesting to see how much actual knowledge and vocabulary there is within the whole class texts. Some of that's clearly really important that we teach explicitly, but we did realise that there's quite a lot of it that when you're reading and you're immersed in a text, that actually you can just kind of explore and be exposed to, and then have some incidental conversations around, whereas other components are really essential to the children's knowledge. Clearly, vocabulary is really, really big, and that's, again, as we were mapping the vocabulary, there's the kind of disciplinary language that we've got within there, but also vocabulary that they're exposed to because the authors have used really interesting vocabulary. And again, some of that is taught explicitly, some of that is kind of incidental. And so, for example, we don't need to introduce and teach all of the vocabulary. So if you took a word like chalice that might come up in there, that we might say it's a bit like a cup or a wine glass. And that's it. That's enough to drop in there when you're reading the story. We don't need to teach a definition as such. It's just important that the children understand the general meaning. We also found that we had done. We've been kind of paying a lot of attention to teaching reading comprehension. So we've mapped the reading comprehension kind of skills throughout the program, and that was important to a certain extent, but actually vocabulary size was a much stronger indicator of the pupils' future success, and Alex Quigley highlights that in his book around closing the vocabulary gap. We also found that, there have been various studies which look at the vocabulary and contextual knowledge. So there have been in America, there have been some studies around if two sets of students have tackled a reading problem, a reading question around soccer, regardless of their reading comprehension skills, those who had the contextual knowledge to understand it and that kind of vocabulary performed better than those without it. So again, actually teaching that vocabulary and extending people's vocabulary has become a really key part of the program. Just a few examples here of some of the types of figurative language and some vocabulary that we have within there. So in the Iron Man, we've got words like astronomer, petroleum, scrap metal, brink, torso, etc. And then here in Secret Garden, again, you can see some of the really ambitious vocabulary, which you wouldn't necessarily teach the children in Year 6 at that point, but because they're immersed in that high quality text and they're experiencing it in the context of the story, they're able to access that and be exposed to far more words and build that much bigger vocabulary. So just to kind of recap and summarize here, so looking at the why, the what, the how, and the impact that we've had. So in terms of our values, high quality whole class text, reading books, physical copies of books is really, really important, making sure that children have their own copy. And that leads to kind of the progress. We want the children to know more and remember more through the knowledge, the vocabulary, and the skills and experiences that they have. The what, in terms of this program, the national curriculum content is all mapped. The questions are aligned to the Key Stage 2 assessment style for familiarity and to align the assessment. Every child, in terms of that mastery approach, every child is accessing the key learning in the lesson, either with additional scaffolding and support or taking it kind of even deeper. And it's around that keep up and not catch up. Concepts, skills, disciplinary knowledge are encountered in different contexts through that spiral approach, with each time just taking it a little bit deeper and adding perspective. And the grammar, punctuation, reading comprehension, sentence level work is taught within the context of the whole class texts. How do we do it? Well, now that we've scaled this to a wider audience and working with a number of schools, the teacher development, that training is really kind of key. We also do development days with that, and there is a whole wealth of planning and resources for all of the lessons, all of the materials in there, so that implementation can be really, really effective. What we have seen, as well as data that we have around outcomes for pupils, actually really, really kind of increasing and improving, we're seeing that teacher expertise. So teachers really developing meaningful learning around the context of the whole class texts. And just as an example, we've seen schools where actually the children don't have their own books at home typically, and through this process, through this program, that every single year they're getting at least a connection with 3 really carefully selected high quality texts. And if they do that every year throughout this program, by the time they leave primary school, they've had that teacher's love and passion for the texts and been exposed to a whole range of really great books, which is a great starting point for their future as a frequent reader. Thank you very much, and I hope that's been interesting and useful.